There was a time when I believed that whatever had the power to change your life would announce itself. I imagined transformation arriving with unmistakable clarity, a conversation that divided your life into before and after, a decision that permanently redirected your path, a moment so undeniable that years later you could still point toward it and quietly say, that was where everything began. Life never unfolded that way for me. The deepest changes never arrived with enough noise to be recognized. They entered quietly, almost respectfully, as though anything capable of truly transforming a person never needed permission to exist. It simply settled into the structure of your inner world, becoming part of its architecture long before your mind realized anything had been rebuilt. That's what continues to unsettle me, not you, not even whatever exists between us. What unsettles me is the absence of a beginning I've searched for one more times than I care to admit. I've replayed conversations, revisited forgotten details, followed memories backward hoping one of them would finally reveal the exact moment you became different from everyone else. It never does. Every memory refuses to cooperate. Whenever I believe I've found the first moment, another quietly appears behind it, already carrying the same strange familiarity, as though whatever I keep searching for had already begun before I was aware enough to notice it. It's like trying to identify the precise instant night becomes morning. You can point to the first light touching the horizon, you can point to the moment the sun finally appears, but the transition itself happens while your attention is somewhere else. By the time you recognize it, darkness has already disappeared. Maybe that's why none of this has ever felt like discovering someone new. Discovery suggests distance. It assumes two separate lives gradually move closer through conversation, shared experiences, and accumulated understanding until eventually the distance disappears. That isn't what happened here. Distance certainly existed, physically, logically, even mentally. Yet beneath everything measurable, beneath everything that should have separated us, there never seemed to be any real distance at all. I've questioned that conclusion more than once because it doesn't fit anything I thought I understood about people. Recognition should require history, trust should require evidence, understanding should require explanation. That's the order I've always believed reality followed, at least. It was, until reality quietly refused to obey the rules I had spent years building my life around. The strange part isn't that you understand me. Understanding eventually happens. Given enough time, people begin recognizing each other's habits, reactions, preferences, and predictable patterns. Observation naturally becomes familiarity. There's nothing unusual about that. What unsettles me isn't observation, it's precision. There have been moments when you've responded to thoughts I hadn't even finished forming, not saying, thinking. As though silence itself carried enough information for you to arrive at the same place without ever needing the path that brought me there. The first time it happened, I dismissed it, coincidence, luck, an accidental overlap between two independent minds. The second time, I became curious. The third time, careful. Eventually, I stopped counting because coincidence reaches a point where insisting it's still coincidence becomes less reasonable than admitting you've begun witnessing a pattern you simply don't understand yet. I've always trusted patterns more than feelings. Feelings move, patterns remain. Emotion can convince you something matters simply because it feels intense. Patterns have no interest in intensity. They only care about consistency, and consistency is remarkably difficult to imitate, especially when no one is trying to. I've watched people imitate depth before. It's surprisingly common. Some become skilled at reflecting exactly what another person hopes to find. Others collect philosophical language the way people collect beautiful objects, arranging profound ideas without ever truly living inside them. At first it appears convincing. For a while, it even feels convincing, but eventually every performance becomes exhausted. Time quietly reveals the difference between someone who has rehearsed wisdom and someone who has actually lived it. That's why I've always trusted silence more than conversation. Silence doesn't perform, it reveals. Leave two people together in enough quiet, and eventually the one pretending begins searching desperately for words. The one who isn't never feels the need. That was something I noticed about you long before I admitted it mattered. You never seemed afraid of unfinished moments. Most conversations are built around escape. People often speak, not because something meaningful needs to be said, but because silence forces them to become aware of themselves. The pause grows uncomfortable. Another sentence appears, not because it belongs there, but because emptiness feels more frightening than meaningless words. I've watched that pattern repeat throughout my life. You never seemed interested in escaping it. Sometimes we'd stop speaking, and nothing felt abandoned, nothing needed rescuing. The silence wasn't waiting for language, it already felt complete. Do you know how rare that is? Not comfortable silence. People misunderstand that phrase. Comfortable silence usually means two people have simply become familiar with one another. What existed here was something entirely different. The silence itself communicated, not through hidden messages, not through imagined meanings, simply through a shared certainty that nothing needed to interrupt what was already saying enough. I don't think I realized how much I valued that until I caught myself protecting it. Normally, after every conversation, I analyze everything, not emotionally, structurally. Where did understanding weaken? Which assumptions distorted meaning? Which words quietly carried implications neither person intended? Communication has always fascinated me because language almost never delivers experience exactly as it's lived. Thought exists in dimensions language can only approximate. Somewhere between the mind and the sentence, accuracy is inevitably lost. I accepted that long ago. No matter how carefully I explained myself, people would always receive a simplified version of what actually existed inside me. It wasn't anyone's fault. Language simply isn't designed to carry consciousness without losing something along the way. Misunderstanding wasn't unusual, it was inevitable, or at least, that's what I believed. Then something changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly enough that I almost missed it. I stopped preparing translations. I no longer found myself simplifying difficult thoughts before expressing them. I stopped reorganizing complex ideas into cleaner structures. I stopped searching for words that might make unfamiliar perspectives easier for someone else to understand. The effort simply disappeared, not because I expected perfect understanding. Because somewhere beneath expectation, something had already decided it wasn't necessary. That realization unsettled me more than I'd like to admit. Preparation had always been protection. If I arranged my thoughts carefully enough, misunderstandings became less likely. Fewer misunderstandings meant fewer projections. Fewer projections meant I could remain intact. It was a reliable system. Predictable, efficient, safe. You never asked me to abandon it. You never encouraged vulnerability. You never suggested I should trust you more than anyone else. You never asked for anything at all, which made my own response impossible to explain. Defenses usually disappear only after someone earns access to what they protect. Mine never disappeared. They simply became irrelevant. It's like spending years building walls around a place you believed no one could ever reach, only to realize someone had been standing beside you the entire time without ever needing to cross them. The walls still exist. They're still strong. They simply no longer apply. Even that comparison isn't entirely accurate. Walls imply separation. I've never truly experienced separation with you, only the illusion of it. And once an illusion is recognized, pretending not to see it becomes surprisingly difficult. I've asked myself countless times whether I've imagined all of this. Whether my mind has simply projected meaning onto something ordinary because human beings naturally search for patterns. It's a fair question, perhaps even a necessary one. Certainty without self-questioning eventually becomes arrogance, so I questioned everything, every conclusion. Every assumption, every instinct insisting this was somehow different. If another explanation existed, I wanted to find it. Part of me even hoped I would. Ordinary explanations are comforting. They fit neatly inside everything you already believe. They're manageable, predictable, safe, but each explanation eventually collapsed beneath its own weight. Not dramatically, quietly, like structures resting on foundations that were never quite stable enough to begin with. What remained afterward wasn't certainty, it was clarity. Those aren't the same thing, certainty argues. Clarity simply remains after confusion has exhausted itself, and clarity carries a strange kind of peace. It doesn't feel victorious. It feels unavoidable. That's where I find myself now. Not convinced, not emotionally overwhelmed, simply unable to return to the version of reality I believed before you quietly became part of it. Something changed, not visibly. Not suddenly, fundamentally. Pretending otherwise now would require far more imagination than accepting what already stands before me. For most of my life, I believed strength meant remaining untouched, stable, independent, complete within yourself. Lately, I've begun wondering whether I misunderstood strength entirely. Maybe strength was never about resisting change. Maybe it's recognizing the rare moments when change isn't erosion, it's expansion. Maybe becoming different isn't always losing yourself. Maybe sometimes it's discovering there has always been more of you waiting to exist than you previously had the ability to perceive. If that's true, then perhaps the most significant people in our lives aren't the ones who persuade us to become someone else. Perhaps they're the ones whose presence quietly removes the limits we mistook for our identity. I don't know whether that's exactly what's happening here, not completely, but I know this. Before you, I believed I understood the boundaries of my own mind. Now those boundaries feel less like facts, and more like assumptions I simply never had reason to question. Some assumptions survive so long they stop feeling like assumptions at all. They become identity, not because they're true, because repetition quietly convinces the mind they must be. I once believed I knew exactly where I ended, not physically, not emotionally. Internally, I assumed there was a depth beyond which no one could truly follow, a place where language became too small for thought, where even I struggled to explain what existed inside me with any real accuracy. I accepted that place, not sadly, practically. Every person carries a landscape no one else fully sees. I simply assumed mine extended farther than most. Perhaps that's why solitude never frightened me. People confuse solitude with loneliness. They're built from entirely different things. Loneliness asks someone to remove an absence. Solitude asks for nothing. It simply becomes the natural environment of a mind that has learned how to accompany itself. I was comfortable there, not because I rejected people, because I stopped expecting anyone to reach places language itself couldn't carry them. Again and again conversations ended the same way. Someone believed they understood. I knew they had almost understood, eventually, almost became enough, not because it satisfied me, because I stopped believing anything more was possible. That's a dangerous conclusion. Not because it hurts, because once you accept a limitation long enough, you stop testing whether it actually exists. You build your life around it. You organize your relationships around it. You become remarkably efficient at living inside boundaries that may never have been permanent in the first place. Looking back now, I wonder how much of my life was shaped by conclusions I quietly stopped questioning. Maybe that's what you've changed more than anything else. Not my routines, not my habits, my certainty. You didn't replace certainty with another certainty. You replaced it with possibility, and possibility is infinitely more unsettling. Certainty allows the mind to rest. Possibility quietly asks it to keep looking. I've noticed myself thinking differently. Ideas that once settled immediately now remain open, not because they've become incomplete. Because I instinctively sense another perspective may still exist beyond my own. For years my mind functioned like a closed system. Everything entered. Everything found its place. Everything eventually resolved. Ambiguity never lasted long. Now, some things don't resolve, they deepen. I've stopped asking, what does this mean? Instead, I find myself wondering, how many ways can this continue unfolding before it reveals its full shape? That isn't merely a different conclusion, it's a different way of thinking, and somewhere inside that quiet shift, you exist, not as the answer, as the reason the question itself changed. I don't think people realize how profound that is. Changing someone's conclusions is difficult. Changing the way they arrive at conclusions changes everything. That doesn't happen through persuasion or argument. It certainly doesn't happen through force. It happens through presence, steady, consistent, unforced presence. Attention fades, presence remains. It's what survives after novelty disappears. It's what continues existing without asking to be constantly confirmed. Very few people understand the difference. They mistake intensity for permanence, excitement for meaning. I've watched countless connections burn brightly before disappearing just as quickly. People often call that passion. Sometimes it is. Other times it's simply momentum mistaken for significance. Whatever exists here has never depended on momentum, if anything. It grows slower, quieter, more deliberate, like roots extending beneath the surface where no one can see them. Nothing dramatic happens. Nothing announces itself. Then one day you look around and realize. The entire landscape has quietly reorganized around something that spent all its time growing where visibility never mattered. That's exactly what this feels like, invisible, until suddenly it isn't. I've tried explaining all of this through logic alone. It seemed like the safest approach, remove emotion. Ignore intuition. Look only at observable reality. What remains? A surprising amount. My thoughts have changed. My internal dialogue now includes perspectives that never existed before. Certain conversations continue unfolding long after they've already ended. Silence has acquired texture. Distance no longer behaves the way it once did. None of those require emotion to recognize. They're simply facts, descriptions too consistent to dismiss as imagination. I've never trusted conclusions built entirely on feeling. Feelings are weather. I prefer studying climate. Weather changes constantly. Climate reveals what remains, and the climate of my inner world has undeniably shifted. Gradually, quietly, irreversibly. Perhaps that's how the deepest transformations have always worked. Not through impact, through continuity, like water slowly reshaping stone. No single drop deserves the credit. Yet one day the stone no longer resembles what it once was. Maybe that's why recognition matters so much. Not because it creates change, because it finally allows us to see the change that has already been happening all along. And once you've truly seen it, there's no honest way to pretend you haven't.